Halman Takyapi. This is Nick Estes with the Red Nation podcast. Today's episode is recordings from Indigenous for Palestine, commemorating 1 year of genocide beginning on October 7th, 2023, and the audacity of Palestinian resistance. You'll hear the voices of Indigenous relatives from throughout Turtle Island, as well as throughout the world, reading reflections commemorating this week, this month, looking back at 1 year of genocide and resistance. And I will start with reading mine. You can find these essays on indigenousforpalestine.org. This one is titled Settler, Self-Defense, and Native Liberation by me. The genocidal assault on Palestinian life is also ideological, with firm roots in Turtle Island. The United States supplies more than bombs. It also supplies the media narrative justifying the slaughter of Palestinians and the colonization of their lands. The Atlantic magazine has become the veritable mouthpiece for what can be called anti-Zionism. This pro-genocide position, standard across corporate media outlets, has only hardened since the intensification of the Zionist-led genocide against Palestinians 1 year ago. Last December, I reluctantly took a phone call from the Atlantic writer Michael Powell, who claimed in an email to be writing, quote, a piece looking at the concept of Turtle Island within the context of struggles around Native and Palestinian rights, end quote. I made clear that his magazine was profoundly anti-Palestinian and therefore anti-Indigenous. The magazine's longtime editor, Jeffrey Goldberg, was a prison guard at the notorious Ketziat prison during the First Intifada from 1987 to 1993. Human rights organizations have called for the prison's closing because of widespread human rights abuses against Palestinians. A colonial prison guard runs the outlet that prides itself on its supposed abolitionist history. Powell countered by citing his own expertise as an author of a book on young Dene basketball players, who he called Navajo, which is a colonial term. The interview was more of him debating the fact that the occupation of Palestine is a European settler colonial project, in a similar vein as Canada and the United States. He said something that has haunted me since, claiming that in Gazan schools, Palestinian children were instructed in anti-Semitism. I could only find sources from this assertion from the Israeli lobby group UN Watch. Israeli President Isaac Herzog appeared to back up this claim when he revealed during a BBC interview in November of 2023 the occupation's discovery of an Arabic translation of Hitler's Mein Kampf in a child's room in Gaza. Spaces for children were now legitimate targets, and Palestinian education system was a significant counterpoint to charges of genocide and colonialism. Today, there are no schools left in Gaza. The occupation has destroyed all of them, including universities, and killed thousands of children, students, and teachers. Gazan school children pose no threat when they are dead, have no schools, and are displaced. Dehumanization is the first step in genocidal incitement. However, counter-annihilation is also a key feature of settler colonialism. It is the belief and practice that colonial society must annihilate Native people. Otherwise, the colonizers in turn will be annihilated in a zero-sum calculus. It is a preemptive, quote-unquote, self-defense against any real or imagined anti-colonial attack. It makes invasion look like self-defense. It is why the chorus of Western media outlets repeat the mantra, Israel has the right to defend itself. But the colonized are never granted the authority of self-defense or the right not to be annihilated. After 1 year of genocide, we have plenty of gruesome evidence of what settler self-defense looks like. Leaked video surveillance shows that occupation prisons are also sites of extreme sexual violence and rape. Everything is legitimate responded the Zionist ruling party to condemnations of prison guards raping Palestinians. Such brutality is not solely a 19th century phenomenon. This is modern 21st century settler colonialism. Settler colonialism wages total war on native societies by attempting to eliminate and destroy familial and kinship relations through a combination of physical destruction, incarceration, and family separation. Such violence is easily seen in the macabre spectacle of military massacre of civilians, which has been live-streamed to billions of witnesses without serious challenge, and, in many cases, with explicit support by the so-called democratic West. The trauma of enduring and surviving each violence carries on for generations. The trauma inflicted upon Native peoples by the United States is a case in point. Only in the last several years has the United States acknowledged its centuries-long genocidal war on Indigenous children. U.S. Colonel Henry Pratt was a notorious Indian killer who turned his pursuits from the battlefield to targeting of Indigenous children and the destruction of Native families. His Carlisle Indian Industrial School, which pioneered removing Native children from their families by sending them to far-off schools, not only attempted to destroy kinship relations to weaken Indigenous resistance, but also killed Native children and used them as hostages to force concessions from their parents, making them little more than prisoners of war. Luther Standing Bear estimated half the children of Carlisle's first class died there. While the off-reservation federal Indian boarding school system has formally ended its child removal policies, Native children today are still disproportionately removed from their families and placed into foster care. According to a 2019 report, Minnesota, where I live, has the highest rates of Native child displacement in foster care, in state foster care, with Native people making up 1.7% of the state's population and 25.8% of children in foster care. The goal is to destroy the very social fabric of Native life, to take the land. Even after Native peoples pose no military threat to settler society, the war still wages against the young. The theft of the young is a theft of the future, and theft of life is naturalized. In my homelands, Native people have a median life expectancy of 58 years old. What Palestinians have taught us, and the people of Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen, and Iran who have joined them, is that things need not always be this way. A year ago, we watched the walls of the largest open-air prison camp come tumbling down. Gazans walked to the villages where they were from. They were surprised their prison guards were so easily overwhelmed. The retribution against their acts of liberation is exacting its toll. The settler counter-annihilation and self-defense doctrine has spread to Lebanon. The United States has clamped down on its own educational system, banning books teaching its true settler colonial history, while brutalizing college students and cracking down on educators opposing its genocide against Palestinians. And yet, there is still hope for justice. The Palestinian surgeon Ghassan Abu Sitta imagines what that future may look like. In the future, when we have a museum for this genocide in Gaza, he recently told Al Jazeera, we will have a special place where we put the pictures of the journalists who have allowed it to happen.
Anin Lian Bidasamuse Simpson Nidijnakas Michisagik Nishnabekwe and Dao. Revolutionary Acts of Love. Although our ancestors lived through the genocide of Indigenous peoples in North America, this past year we have witnessed a genocide in real time with technologically advanced warfare, destruction, and obliteration on a spectacular scale. We've watched daily video footage and photos of unimaginable violence targeting families and children. We've read social media posts, news reports, and poetry coming from Palestinians inside Gaza. and we've watched the very states that have dispossessed us of our homelands supply the weapons and unwavering political support to Israel to do the same to the Palestinian people. This past year, we've seen the depths settler colonialism will go to secure land and resources alongside the death of any shared morality for life and living. Witnessing Canada, the United States, and Israel manufacture consent for colonialism and justifications for dispossession, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and genocide in Palestine has shown me there is no end to the lies they will tell to secure their narrative. This past year has been a living example of how the public learns to justify colonialism and genocide, and how, despite evidence to the contrary, they find two sides. We have, again, been showing the real danger of reconciliation isn't in that it is performative, but that its architecture obfuscates the ongoing logics of colonialism in Canada so fully that too many of us could not recognize Israeli settler colonialism and genocide when it was live streamed to our phones in real time. This past year has reaffirmed the importance of teaching Palestine and writing about colonialism and anti-colonialism in North America and in the global South. It has reaffirmed the importance of organizing a cross-struggle and taking inspiration from the long tradition of Palestinian resistance, because, as Fargo Tabaki writes, quote, "To write in solidarity with Palestine is to write amidst the long middle of revolution. I've been reminded by Palestinians and my ancestors that defeating colonialism is a long struggle demanding a steadfast perseverance." Following the outstanding example of Palestinians, I've learned how crucial it is to learn to speak, write, and organize through and alongside grief, rage, and violence. From students and their constellated encampments, I was reminded of the power of direct action and solidarity as a lived practice, and the importance of building otherwise to not only hold universities accountable for their enthusiastic support for Israeli settler colonialism, but to generate the knowledge, skills, and networks we need to build anti-colonial futures, to create refuge in the midst of repression, and to show Palestinians in Gaza that they have been seen and heard, and we are acting. From all the people worldwide that spoke out, wrote, organized, and stood up for Palestine, I've learned that even though millions of us have not yet been able to stop this genocide, we will continue to refuse colonialism and genocide and work tirelessly to end the occupation, dismantle apartheid, and free dear Palestine. Mihawa.
E nā hoa welo like mai ko Hawaii pai aina ka apuni kanani ko honua ola, ana ai me ke aloha, o Kawila Mahi ko oina. Aloha, my name is Kawila Mahi. I'm an Oiwi Hawaii visual artist, researcher, video game designer, cultural organizer, and composer from Honolulu, Hawaii. I'll be reading my contribution to the series Indigenous Solidarity with Palestine, Pai Aina Wide, PLO style, with some commentary. In a lesser-known track by Method Man on the Takal album in 1994, Meth admires the Palestinian Liberation Organization's unconventional resistance tactics with the lyric, "I live by the code, style, it's mad, PLO." This framing by Method Man is important to understand the role of music in sustaining our movements and the eruptions and shifts that occur in our movements guiding us towards liberation. So I'd like to add some commentary here. Music is a place where different rhythms, different worldviews, different sounds attract and sometimes even repel people into movements towards liberation. Some see music as their most important teacher, and for myself, music has been a way where I learn or sometimes I'm exposed to new ideas and new places who are struggling for liberation as well, and finding connection in the rhythms and in the pockets between the rhythms that help guide us towards having a disciplined solidarity with each other. On speakers throughout Hawaii, na ki'owai, na punawai, kaulana o Palestina interpreted the famed pools, the famed springs of Palestine, echoes through the speakers. These lyrics are a new composition which borrow from his parent song, Akanid Kau, a composition lamenting a loss that is grounded in place and draws connection between an aina, or land, and the person whom the Kanikau was composed. On October 7th last year, I was restless and drawn to seek the way my ancestors sought connection with Palestina. Among the thousands of archival material ingraining connections between Hawaii and Palestine was a kanikau dedicated to Timoteo Ha'ililio, one of our high chiefs who secured Ko Hawaii Pai'aina, the Hawaiian archipelago, as an independent nation state in 1843, and passed away on the way home to Hawaii from European powers in 1844. I sampled the original composition, which traces Timoteo Ha'ililio to lands, chiefs, and ancestral gods famed in our mo'olelo and history. And then it recalls Palestina as follows without modern orthography. Aloha na waipuna me naki owai o Palestina, interpreted as love to the spring and pools of Palestine. This is another commentary. These lyrics became a chant that people started to use and adopt, that I kind of put onto speakers at a rally because I sampled this melody, this song, those lyrics from that song. And more people have been learning Hawaiian frameworks around solidarity and how storied and how long our solidarity has been with a lot of lands, but especially so with Palestine. Over the last year, we were reminded that colonialists disguise themselves as neighbors, professors, corporations, or presidents, and that sometimes our people yearn to wear the same hat. My commitment to a disciplined and principled solidarity with my relatives in Palestine came from recognizing that the struggle for every liberationist is never done in isolation. Our connections to each other is what binds us to the future the world needs. That was the greatest lesson I've learned from Palestine. I shifted my focus to unearth archival connections and educating people about these connections to my own community through Olelo Hawaii, or Hawaiian language. And part of this decolonial education emphasized that our kupuna, our ancestors, studied and participated in movements throughout the world during the 19th and 20th century. The instrumental work of the late Haunani Trask consistently drew connections between Hawaii and Palestina and other struggles around the world since the 1980s. And it is a guide by which many of us have shifted our politic, advocating for mutual recognition as forms of nationhood that far predate Western notions of sovereignty. Although it may feel hopeless to be on the other side of the world witnessing innumerable erasures taking place because of genocidal campaigns of colonialists, discipline and principled solidarity is of the utmost importance. The Palestinian struggle has awakened the world, but for us in Hawaii, our deep-seated love and commitment to our lands is a mutual form of recognition to folks out in Palestine and other nations throughout the world who have love for their land. When listening to Palestinians sharing their connection to olive trees, it echoes hauntingly similar rhythms to Kanaka Maoli speaking about kalo or taro. And that goes to show us we are not only all connected by our love for our lands, we are all connected by our yearning to struggle for liberation. And so that brings me back to the closing. At 1 a.m. on a random Saturday, I checked my daughter's notes in her iPad to see if she left any letters for our family to read. Well, most were simple emoji expressions of her day-to-day life. One note in particular read, "I love Palestine. Free, free Palestine," with a Palestinian flag and heart emoticons. Sometimes people may wonder if the next generation is ready to take the helm and incite a change. But the letter my daughter wrote reminded me, and should remind all of you, every struggle for liberation is a part of my nation. We can't be free until we're all free. Long live the struggle. Free Hawaii. Free Palestine.
A Kanaka learns aloha from her Palestinian ohana. Like most Native kids queered by colonialism, I spent much of my life trying to understand aloha. I often felt an existential need to find and make aloha in my own image. This would eventually define my young years. In my adolescence, I turned beyond the individual to the collective practice of aloha. I studied aloha and the Hawaiian movement from my father's mountain range shoulders and his shadow. I was ever inspired by the way aloha has held and challenged our movements and people. As an adult, I turned my study to my ancestors. The last decade in particular was dedicated to a study of aloha aina and the distinctness of Oiwi practices of care, desire, and intimacy that are rooted in and learned from the land. I aim to remember where and how we learn aloha, and where and how and for what purposes it is commercialized and desecrated. In recent years, my little ancestors, my 3-year-old daughter and 6-month-old son, have become my mentors in aloha, softening and opening the parts of me that have long hardened and closed. They have deepened my commitment to honoring the preciousness of aloha. I say all of this to set a foundation that has now been shattered. I have lived my whole life most profoundly wishing to know aloha, and I have studied it in all the common and expected places, and still, nothing would teach me more about this crucial human practice as the Palestinian struggle for freedom. Not even our precious aloha aina has transformed me in my spirit, such as the Palestinian fight for life amidst the state of Israel's genocidal campaign. Aloha for the land they will not abandon. Aloha for each other they will not forsake. Aloha for a future they will not surrender. Aloha in the hands of the baker stretching carbs for his starving community. Aloha in the bloodied fingertips of the father pulling his family from the rubble with his bare hands. Aloha in the trembling voice of the mother, crying out her grief, refusing to be ignored. Aloha in the burdened shoulders of the son, hiking half his weight in flour daily to feed his family and friends. Aloha in the cracking palms of the daughter, her hands stretched out to hold all that has been left behind or abandoned. Aloha in the sutures of the surgeon, stitching in the dark of night while his hospital shakes in the constant shelling. Aloha in the soil, cradling the bones of the martyrs. Aloha in the Kevlar of the journalists, their dark blues promising a sacrifice. Aloha in the diaspora, each of Palestine's beloved children who will someday surely return to the homes of their parents and grandmothers. Aloha for those who struggle beside them, among them, for them, from miles and worlds away. Aloha in the marches, the rallies, the liberated zones. Aloha in the sit-ins, the barricades, the freeways shut down. Aloha in the boycotts, the divestments, and the demands for sanctions. Aloha defines this movement. In its anger, despair, and even in its rage, it is aloha that holds the center. Should we waste our short time together to speak of the other side? Perhaps not. Suffice it to say, there is no aloha in greed, none in theft or settlement or slaughter. There is no aloha in occupation or colonialism, not even in sovereignty. There is no aloha in genocide or removal, shelling or ground invasion. There is no aloha in collective punishment or multi-billion-dollar weapons packages, none in the UN Security Council's repetitious vetoes. When boiled down to their essence, the state of Israel is simply greed masked in a mission of extermination, and our occupiers are happy to support their younger siblings in settlerism. Perhaps we should instead stay with love, aloha, all sides of it. Its rage, its softness, the way it cries and calls out for us, how it resonates, not an ideology, but a promise of something far more precious, the life of the land perpetuated in the liberation of its first peoples. I am here to tell you, if you haven't been paying attention, the movement for Palestinian freedom is a movement of aloha. It is a movement that is teaching us more about ourselves and our own principles and allegiance to that which is precious. To my Kanaka Maoli ohana, yes, our people first learned aloha from our aina, our land. She taught us reciprocity, care, intimacy, pleasure. But she is not the only place we can learn how to practice and uphold the radical call of aloha. There is so much we can and should learn from Palestine and her stalwart people. And when we learn, we must turn that knowledge to action. We must turn that knowledge towards freedom. We must turn that knowledge in service of our Palestinian comrades. I am asking us to pay closer attention. To fail to do so would to forsake aloha in this critical moment. Many have argued before me that it is aloha that defines the Kanaka Maoli people. Perhaps then, to surrender or ignore our duty to aloha in acts of cowardice or in allegiance to some bastard notion of the state and its right to defend itself would be to lose ourselves entirely. Freeing Palestine is an act of aloha. It is a commitment that will bring us closer to our ancestors, our lands, and our collective humanity. Come and join the struggle. Mahalo.
My name is Dominic, and I belong to the nations and the lands of the Ngarrindjeri and Kaurna peoples. I currently reside on the northern plains of Ghana Yata. I am a poet, community organizer, artist, and a curator, and I'm currently undertaking my master's in gender studies at Flinders University. Both my art and community organizing has a primary focus on Aboriginal protest movements and fight for land back and Aboriginal self-determination. Over the past year, I've been working collectively, organizing our local response to the ongoing genocide towards the Palestinian peoples. Today, I'll be reading my piece, The Audacity of Reflection. I find it hard to write words of self-reflection, to ponder what lessons I have learned from the past year. Is it really my place to learn a lesson from this ongoing genocide of Palestinian people? Many of the lessons people are learning are not new to me. For many, this moment has been a realization that their governments are not just corrupt, but are also complicit to the evils of the world. That their media is biased, and that the people around them will turn their backs on the genocide being live streamed on their social media. As an Aboriginal person living in so-called Australia, these truths have been a reality for me and my people for decades, and nor am I shocked to learn of the ignorance of so many others. I guess I could write about the amazing group of allies I've been lucky enough to connect with, sitting in circles, sipping peppermint tea and plotting our next action, awareness, education, or fundraising. But the truth is the group would hate me to even be thinking about acknowledging them for the work that they are doing. But I'm fortunate to have them in my life nonetheless. I could write about the Palestinian people in my life, who I knew before and have met since October 2023. But how much more do they need to be put under the gaze of another writer's pen? An irrevocable ripple has already ripped through their lives. Their experiences, like the Palestinians currently in Palestine, are not for me to learn from, nor is it my place to write about. Why pause to reflect? Just because it's been a year since October 2023? Where do Palestinians have the privilege to pause and reflect? And even if they do find a moment, what gives us the permission to put down our banners, to take the time for ourselves and our opinions on something that we shouldn't be centered in? The assault from Israel is only increasing for Palestinians, Lebanese, and other Arab nations who defy Zionism's colonization. Now is not the time for reflection, but rather for more action, more than ever before. So no, you will not get my reflections, as I do not have the time or the audacity to do so. Instead, I urge you to continue to engage with your local Palestinian community. Continue to listen to Palestinian people. Take action within your part of the world. And finally, like my Lebanese friend Adam says, be staunch or fuck off.
Again, All Settlers Know Is Death and Destruction by Demetrius Johnson. Whether it's settlers shooting guns towards indigenous people in border towns of New Mexico or across the world in Gaza and the West Bank, we all suffer from the disease of settler colonialism and imperialism. It's been 1 year since the act of resistance by Palestinians against their settler oppressor Israel. When I first saw the footage of these Palestinian uncles fly over the apartheid walls that cage Gazans on their own land and then use bulldozers to demolish those walls, I knew the world was going to change. The footage released as my comrades and I returned from ceremony done for us due to the September 28th, 2023 shooting in front of the Rio Arriba County Administrative Building in Espanola, New Mexico. I want to emphasize something that happened that September 28th. For those who do not know, it was a day of celebration for those of us who do not want to honor and glorify colonizers and genociders. We, the Red Nation, the Pueblo communities, and non-native supporters had already won the battle of taking down statues that honor colonizers in the summer of 2020, which was catalyzed by the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd uprisings. Statues of Juan de Onate, who led the first Spanish expeditions in Pueblo and Diné territories in what is now known as New Mexico in the late 1500s, were taken down in both Espanola and Albuquerque, New Mexico. We had to fight again to prevent Rio Arriba County officials from spending more of the county's money to take the toppled statue from 2020 out of storage to be erected again, while Rio Arriba County was facing a fentanyl crisis that made it the highest rate for fentanyl-related overdoses in New Mexico. On the day of the celebration, the Red Nation drove two distinguished relatives who have battled and resisted settler colonialism, Elder Marish Chino from Acoma Pueblo and Mohammed El Kurd from Sheikh Jarrah El Quds, from Albuquerque up north to Espanola. They spoke to the crowd on why it's important to tell our stories of resistance as indigenous people and to not let the settlers celebrate colonialism and genocide on lands that are not theirs. Everything seemingly was a beautiful and powerful celebration. That was when a shot was fired from Ryan Martinez, a settler who lives in a wealthy and prominent New Mexico area named Sandia Park with his parents, that struck Jacob Johns. In the immediate aftermath, Jacob had been taken to the hospital, and we were still waiting in the parking lot, waiting to leave by order of the police. I heard from my comrades that it was Mohammed El Kurd who escorted the many children that were there at the celebration towards safety from the gunfire. When we asked Mohammed, he graciously denied and proclaimed that it was actually the children who escorted him away from danger. I believe that it was meant to be that Mohammed was there to help our children in that moment, to give them strength, safety, and guidance in a traumatic moment. But since that moment in Espanola, how many Palestinian children have experienced the shooting of guns towards them 1,000,000-fold? It is going to take the fierce resistance of all indigenous and colonized people to protect our children, the future, and our planet from settler empires like Israel and the United States. After all, settlers only know violence, destruction, and death.